I'm so happily married. I have this super strong, really amazing marriage. And sometimes I still lay in bed and I have these voices like, she just hates me. And one day she's just going to have to let me know that she's out.
Until we actually reprogram those subconscious core wounds, those things will come up in our thought patterns.
Meet Thais Gibson,
leading expert in attachment theory and best-selling author.
So the 4 major attachment styles are: number 1, the secure attachment style. Then we have 3 insecure attachment styles. We have our fearful avoidant, the dismissive avoidant, the anxious attachment style. First of all, everybody has an attachment style, but anybody who's insecurely attached, it's because we have these pre-existing core wounds.
What do we do about it if we're kind of burdened with one of these insecure attachment styles?
A lot of people are like, it's too hard to change your attachment style. It's actually not hard. It's usually a 90-day period. There are 5 major pillars of becoming securely attached. One is
Wow, this is revelatory. Welcome to another episode of Unlock Your Potential. This is Jeff Lerner, your host, always riveted to be back with you, having amazing conversations with amazing human beings. Today, we are joined by Thais Gibson, the leading expert in attachment theory. Basically, the person that understands why all your screwed up relationships were so screwed up, and even your good ones worked out the way they did. Thais has a Ph.D. and over 13 certifications in modalities such as CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. See, I know my therapeutic acronyms. Somatic experiencing, somatic meaning like in the body, internal family systems, shadow work, how Jungian. She has nearly a decade of experience running a successful private practice and engaging with over 30,000 clients, presumably not all at the same time, through individual sessions, workshops, and an educational platform. She's a counselor and co-founder of the Personal Development School, which is a really badass YouTube channel I was totally stalking earlier today. And she is the leading expert in attachment theory. And she has a concept called integrated attachment theory that we're going to be unpacking here. Literally, we could just sit here for an hour. I could read her bio. It's a very prolific. She's a very accomplished, very successful, very cool, very interesting, all those things. But probably the biggest thing that I think everybody's going to gravitate towards is not just attachment styles that kind of explain how people are and why people are in relationships, but this revelation that you can actually change your attachment style. You're not cursed, so to speak. So unless I missed anything critical, Thais, I would love to just jump in.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. And I guess we could start by maybe going into what attachment styles are for anybody who's not really certain. Okay, perfect. So basically, there are 4 major attachment styles. Attachment theory was originally the work of John Bowlby out of Cambridge University and later Mary Ainsworth. But there's a lot of discussion about how childhood attachment develops and how we have different styles, but not a lot of discussion in depth enough, in my opinion, about how your attachment style affects your adult relationships, in particular romantic, but really all relationships, workplace, family, friendships, and most importantly, how you can change your attachment style if you had some dysfunction in your attachment style and upbringing. So the 4 major attachment styles are: number 1, the secure attachment style. The secure person has a lot of what we call approach-oriented behaviors in childhood. And so they basically have a lot of, when they express or cry, they have a lot of attunement from their parents or caregivers, a lot of somebody actually paying attention to them, trying to come and solve the problem, soothe them in some way, make them feel better. And it sounds like a small thing, but it has such a massive impact, where if you have that consistently enough in childhood, you basically learn my needs are worthy of being met. My emotions are safe to express. I can trust people. I can rely on them. Connection is a safe and good thing. And unfortunately, that is something that the 3 insecure attachment styles don't learn in totality in any sort of similar way. So securely attached individuals, because of those very functional relationship models that they have growing up, end up in the most long-lasting relationships as adults. They statistically report thriving the most in those relationships, actually having a great time in those relationships, and they move out of what we call the power struggle stage of love and connection. So that's our secure. Then we have 3 insecure attachment styles. And those 3 styles are: number 1, the anxious attachment style. This individual grows up with sometimes very loving caregivers or parents, but there's a lot of inconsistency. So basically, you can imagine that, for example, 2 loving parents, but they work all the time and they have to travel all the time for work. that kind of context will create a lot of repetitive perceived abandonment. And it's actually repetition and emotion that fire and wire neural pathways and really condition a child. So this person grows up and they have this fear of love being taken away because that's so much of their upbringing. And they constantly fear being abandoned, excluded, rejected, these sorts of things that very much have to do with being preoccupied and anxious that somebody will leave or not be there. On the other end of that attachment continuum, we have the dismissive avoidant. Dismissive avoidants grow up with a lot of what we call childhood emotional neglect. Again, it's often very covert. It's not necessarily like parents are never around, food's never on the table. A lot of times parents are there, but there's just no expression of emotion that's really acceptable in the household. So a child may see that, their food's on the table, they're at school on time, but when they want to express emotion, it's like go back into the other room, come back when you're done crying, or children should be seen or not heard. And these types of expressions and ways of treating emotions that causes a child to go, okay, this is wrong. This part of me is wrong because nobody wants to love, accept, or see me in my emotional state. So as an adaptation to that, they sever off from their emotions, really divorce the emotional part of themselves, and they internalize that part of themselves as being shameful or defective. And so this adult grows up to be like, wait, I don't want closeness. I don't want to feel vulnerable or weak or too open or let people get too close to me because they'll see that deep down something's wrong with me. Last but not least, we have our fearful avoidant. They are marked by a lot of chaos in childhood. So they have a lot of both the anxious side of the attachment spectrum and the avoidant side. They sort of feel like a blend or a mix of styles a lot of the time. And generally what happens to this individual is there's a lot of chaos. And this could be lots of fighting in the home, a parent who's an alcoholic, has a cluster B personality disorder, these types of issues. And it causes a child to have sometimes really good experiences with love and sometimes really scary ones. And so this child grows up with conflicting ideas about connection. And sometimes they go, oh my gosh, I'm scared of being abandoned. I want that love and connection. And sometimes they go, somebody's too close and I can't trust love and connection. I can't trust people. Because if you grew up in a household where you couldn't trust the environment, there was too much chaos or unpredictability and you were always waiting for the other shoe to drop. As an adult, you won't really trust in people. And so this individual sometimes feels anxious, sometimes feels avoidant, but at their core struggle to really let their guard down and trust and believe that love and connection is safe and something that they can really invest in.
Okay, so amazing primer. I want to just check in. So my original exposure to attachment styles had used what I suspect is the same structure, but slightly different labels that I suspect maybe you've tried to be more clear about. My initial exposure was just secure, anxious, avoidant, and anxious avoidant.
Yes.
And those line up here. You're just using more descriptive, anxious, more accurate labels.
Yeah. So we can even simplify. So anxious, preoccupied is the anxious. Avoidant right. That you heard is dismissive avoidant. And that oftentimes this isn't brought up as much, but this is in all of the attachment research. Fearful avoidant, disorganized, anxious avoidant, they're all used interchangeably, but we'll call it fearful avoidant for now. And that's the one that's marked by a lot more chaos in their experience and upbringing.
Okay, cool. Yeah, those were the associations I had made. I just wanted to double check on that. So yeah, I mean, I'll just say, this has been like profound for me. I am by nature, I would like to think that by nature we're all secure, that like we're designed for love and to do it well. But maybe by nurture. I'm dismissive avoidant. No, I'm sorry. I'm anxious preoccupied. That's what I meant to say. Which is like basically I worry a lot. Like I literally still, I'm so happily married. I have this super strong, really amazing marriage, third time's the charm. And sometimes I still lay in bed like, and I have these voices like, she just hates me. She's got her reasons why she doesn't want me to know, but I can feel it. And one day she's just going to have to let me know that she's out. Like, it's so dumb, but it's like,
It's not, but it has roots. Okay. So can we explore that for a second? Just for
totally
relate.
Oh, free therapy? Hell yeah. Let's do it.
So I think I love how vulnerable you were to share that, because this is something that like I'm sure everybody with an attachment style relates to. We just relate to in different ways. And first of all, everybody has an attachment style, but anybody who's insecurely attached, it's because we have these pre-existing core wounds. So the dismissive avoidance version of it is often like, What if I get trapped? What if somebody really sees me? They find out that I'm defective or something's wrong with me. I don't want to be too weak or too vulnerable, from their core wounds in their childhood, which programs the subconscious mind, and the subconscious mind stores everything. So all of this time later, those wounds are still there until we actually reprogram them. The anxious side of it is exactly that. Oh, like what if eventually she's going to find out that I'm not what she wants and she's going to be out, or, she really doesn't actually love me, or these fears. And fearful avoidant have a lot of sort of shared experiences on both sides there. Now, if you look back to childhood, did you have experiences of feeling, even if you had very loving parents, that inconsistency there caused you to feel like not sure if, somebody was going to stick around or be there or love you the way that you needed, or feel excluded, or any of those sorts of dynamics?
Yeah, no. So as you were explaining it, I'll tell you that the two things that went through my mind. One is like, well, yeah, of course. So my mom was, I was 2 months old when my mom took the bar exam.
Okay.
And she began a very successful, very immersed career as an attorney while I was an infant.
Yeah.
And my first year of life, I was basically watched by my aunt.
Yeah.
And so my mom's not alive anymore, so she's never going to hear this, but I mean, she's listening somewhere, but love you, Mom. I don't blame you. I'm so proud of you. You did amazing things, but everything has assets and liabilities. And this was probably one of the liabilities here. Your son is anxious, preoccupied.
Well, that's exactly the type of context that would create that style is, Mom probably loved you very much, but just couldn't be there consistently in the way that you needed. And so as a child, it's going to ingrain the repetition and emotion of feeling abandoned in some form or condition. And so until we actually reprogram those subconscious core wounds, which is actually very easy to do, but just nobody really talks about it enough, those things will come up in our thought patterns. Because if you imagine, we adopt these beliefs. So how the subconscious mind gets programmed is repetition and emotion fires and wires neural pathways, creates these neural networks, and eventually becomes a part of our identity. And so if you're a young child, 2 months, we're very suggestible, by the way. The first 3 years of our lives are arguably the most important and impactful. And so in terms of our programming and conditioning, and so this needing mom and she couldn't quite be there is going to create a belief like, okay, I am abandoned, or I am emotionally unsafe. And then beliefs, you can imagine being like a tree trunk that lead to thoughts. So all the tree branches coming off of the tree trunk are the thoughts. And we'll think this person might leave, they might change their mind. I don't know if this could last long term because eventually she might get bored, and we're going to have all of these thoughts that spar off or kind of spread off of that core belief, the tree trunk of I am going to be abandoned. And then our tree leaves are sort of our emotions, like how we feel when we're telling ourselves those thoughts. Well, we feel sad or insecure or afraid. And the neuroscience has actually proven every single decision we make is based on our emotional state. So even people quick to rationalize through logic, they're really just making emotionally based decisions at the tipping point, and then right after that, rationalizing and justifying those choices through logic. So out of curiosity, when you think those thoughts, when you've had those thoughts, what do you feel and how do you tend to cope with those?
And then remind me, I have a question about timing of these early life experiences. But how do I tend to feel? Let me try to go there. I don't think insecurity is technically a feeling. It's probably like a low grade panic.
Yeah, exactly. And that probably.
And then you asked what I do. You also asked what do I do, right?
Yeah.
It depends. If it's night, like maybe she's already asleep, I'll either try to go to sleep if I think I'm tired enough, or distract myself, or if it's like during the day, I'll usually reach over and hold her hand or just kind of seek some reassurance.
Yeah. And those are really healthy approaches to that, right? You're coming at it from a good way, but you'll see that feeling, that feeling of insecurity or that feeling of low grade panic is probably what was a very deeply ingrained neural network from being 2 months old and going through that experience. And it's almost like the echoes or remnants of it all this time later. And so there's a way to reprogram, and we can talk all about how to actually reprogram these things. But I was fearful avoidant. So for anybody who resonates with that style, that has the anxious and avoidant side. A big thing for me, if we follow that sort of train, I had this big belief I can't trust. And it wouldn't even be that I was like thinking that everybody was going to be like untrustworthy. It was more like I couldn't trust the future with somebody. Like, how do I know in 20 years they won't get bored, or I won't get bored, or that they won't do something bad then, or, and so constantly, when I would feel that, those thought patterns, the belief was I can't trust the thought patterns were, in 20 years or whatever could happen in the future, I would feel overwhelmed or afraid of that. And I would respond by pushing people away. And so you can see how like the beliefs lead to thoughts, to emotions, to actions, and all of our actions and coping mechanisms are actually subconscious strategies to usually deal with or mitigate that core wound that's been programmed in there a long time ago to begin with. So we can talk about all the reprogramming stuff, but you said you had a question about timing.
Yeah, I did. So one of the, like I by no means claim to be an expert, but I would say I'm probably a pretty dangerous dilettante in psychology and such things. So one of the things I've studied a decent amount is this like stages of psychosocial development.
Yeah.
And it talks about how the different stages of child development produce, essentially, we resolve different conflicts at different ages that ultimately result in the development of different virtues or character traits. And I don't know whether or not you subscribe to it. I think Erickson's pretty well credited.
Absolutely. Yep. Eric Erickson. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
So my question is, the first psychosocial stage is trust.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like 0 to 18 months roughly. And so when you were talking, I told you two things went through my mind. One was, oh yeah, it's my mom, but also it was that really critical first year window for me. Like I didn't get any time to build, the trust in this regard. So I'm curious, because when you say like childhood experiences, but in terms of developing an attachment style, is it weighted toward particular phases of childhood, or is it just sort of like generically everything up until puberty, up until, what would you say?
The fantastic question. So it's sort of like a two-layered question. Or answer, I mean. So the first thing is the original work of John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, they had something called the strange situation experiment. So what they would do between the ages of 0 to 2 years old, they would have young children come into a room that was sort of like a doctor's office waiting room, and they would have the caregiver, it always had to be the primary caregiver, sit with the child in the waiting room for a few minutes, then eventually sit the child down on the floor or on the chair and leave the room, close the door, child's alone in the room, and a stranger comes in and sits with the child. And the stranger is just in the room for a moment or two. It doesn't really in particular interact with the child too much. And what they could do is see how the child would respond both in that moment, but in particular when the parent would then come back into the room. So stranger leaves, parent comes back, and they could identify a child's attachment style between the ages of 0 to 2 years old. And what they would see is the anxious attachment style would cling a ton, right? When the parent comes back in, really hold on tight, not want to have the parent out of their sight or proximity. The dismissive avoidant, the parent would come back in, and the child would minimize their attachment needs to the parent. So they would go, they would look away. The parent would try to make eye contact, connect. Child would ignore them and basically fade out. And the fearful avoidant or disorganized attachment style would be very hot and cold, kind of crawl towards the parent, be very volatile, emotionally crying, frustrated, flustered, crawl towards the parent. When the parent would come to approach them, they would move away. It's like you could see that the child couldn't decide if they wanted closeness or distance, and they were sort of caught in that in-between mode. And so our original attachment style develops between the ages of 0 to 2, absolutely happens in those early stages of psychosocial development. And then because of neuroplasticity, we can have our attachment style change over time. So an example could be somebody grows up securely attached till the age of 8, sees this terrible divorce or has one parent pass away. And then at that point, we can actually have our attachment style develop into, for example, anxious, because we go through this big T trauma or dramatic loss at that point in time. And so our attachment style can shift, but the roots of our original attachment style are going to be stronger. So what you're going to actually see, for example, is somebody who developed their anxious attachment style between 0 to 2 is more likely to have a little bit more of that deeply embedded or imprinted into them across life. Unless, of course, we do that reconditioning very intentionally and purposefully, then you would see, for example, somebody who, was anxiously attached because of some big change that happened to them at 14 years old with one of their parents.
Okay, when do we kind of get in the clear where life events are no longer going to significantly impact our attachment style? Is there kind of a cutoff?
No such a thing because of neuroplasticity. So our attachment style can change, right? You can be somebody who deeply, deeply loves, God forbid, but let's say not you, let's say Bob, but let's say, character Bob over here is anxiously attached, deeply in love with that partner. Let's say he thinks, oh, this is a great relationship. And it turns out that partner was very charming for the first 2 years, but actually has narcissistic personality disorder and goes on to be a terror to their life in different forms. It's highly likely at that point that Bob's attachment style would shift from anxious attachment to fearful avoidant because there's all of these trust issues and challenges. And when we look at how the brain actually is conditioned by experiences, anything we are repeatedly exposed to, repetition and emotion, will fire and wire neural pathways that will change how we view ourselves and how we view interpersonal relationships. And so because of neuroplasticity, we can see shifts and changes throughout the course of our lives based on proximity to experiences that we have. It's also part of why you'll hear a lot of the original advice around attachment, which I think is quite limited, but I get why they say it, is, if you're anxious, just date somebody secure. Because being in proximity to somebody with those secure patterns will, through repetition and emotion, basically rub off on somebody else and help to recondition some of those challenges that they're facing. If you're anxious, date someone who's secure, because then they'll never activate your anxiety. So therefore you'll never corrupt or contaminate their security. And it will help you to evolve to become more secure, right? Because being rewired to proximity to that. But it is a little bit of a simplistic piece of advice because, interestingly enough, your subconscious mind is most attracted to its zone of familiarity. So in theory, everybody who's insecurely attached should date a secure person, but usually that's not how it works. I can tell a personal example. So I was fearful avoidant, and until I really rewired my attachment style to become secure, I had a period of time where I actually dated somebody who was securely attached, and I thought they were boring because my subconscious comfort zone was chaos. Right. So even though my conscious mind says, but they've got everything that you should want and everything's perfect on paper, it wasn't part of what I was actually interested in investing in, because at the end of the day, our subconscious mind is choosing from a space where it wants what's familiar because it equates it to safety and thus survival. And so we will not often just be attracted to securely attached people if we are insecurely attached.
So I feel like there's some wisdom. This may be a little bit of a tangent, but I feel like there's some wisdom in here for like nice guys. Because there's, I literally had a conversation recently up with a nice guy who was sort of bemoaning the fate of the nice guy, that like, women don't seem to want a nice guy, right? And it's like, so I figure, okay, who's the nice guy? The nice guy is either the secure attachment style person who's just authentically nice, or authentically, I would probably choose the term kind, or they're the anxious attachment style who's trying to create dependency so they don't get left by being almost like unctuous or, overly so. And so, but in either case, it's probably really helpful to know that you're not, in terms of attachment style, you're not actually dating the person you're dating. You're actually kind of dating their parents or the way they were raised.
Okay. Yeah, you nailed that. Sorry, were you going to say something else?
No, well, I have another thought, but yeah, let's riff on this one first.
So I love this. I actually love what you said first about nice versus kind. I think that's a really important distinction. Kind, you'd see a securely attached person be kind, but a securely attached person goes like this. They're going to date somebody. They're going to be kind. They're going to put their best foot forward, but they have boundaries, they have standards, and they have non-negotiables. And so if somebody comes in and they're acting in a way that doesn't make sense, the securely attached person would go say, hey, you know what? I don't really love this. Let's work on this. And if they don't, and if they're not willing to, if they're doing things unhealthy, the securely attached person will say, okay, it's not a fit for me. And they're okay to leave. The nice person, not the kind person, often comes from a place of, I'm going to walk on eggshells. I'm going to make sure I do everything perfectly, and basically people please as a means of trying to gain closeness or proximity to connection. But there's this inherent self-abandonment that takes place within that. And interestingly enough, one of the biggest things that drives attraction is something called trait variety. So there's three big things that drive attraction. This is, I would argue, the second most important. We're attracted to somebody who often expresses our repressed traits. If I have no boundaries and somebody's really assertive, I'll be attracted to that, for example. And so what happens when somebody's the nice guy or the nice girl or who, people pleasing all the time, they're not willing to express traits different from their partner or the person they're dating and show their true authentic self, which actually diminishes their attractiveness to the other person.
Oh my gosh, why didn't I have this conversation before I had that conversation? Because I could have told this suffering nice guy, let me say this back to you, what I think you just said, and tell me if this makes sense, because I feel like I just had a light bulb moment, that a nice person is so worried about disappointing or giving cause to their assumption they're going to be abandoned, that they almost are trying to mirror back the person that they're trying to please. And in so doing, they're making themselves unattractive because they're basically giving the person nothing but what they already have versus something new and novel. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly.
That's amazing. Okay. And this totally, by the way, explains how, as an anxious, my wife and I, who I would say she's probably more natively secure than I was, but yeah, I'll just say nobody's perfect. And my guess would be she was more on the fearful or anxious avoidant. But I think the way we've navigated that, we've done a lot of therapy, which is kind of what got me into knowing as much about this as I do or don't, as the case may be. But I do think that the things, like, we are a big case of opposites attract. Like, I have a lot of traits that are very different from hers. And I'll just objectively say she's way better looking than me. So I think a lot of people are always scratching their head trying to figure it out, But like now that at least makes some sense, I suppose.
And it's one of the three biggest things that actually drives that attraction. And so it's so funny because when people do not give space to be themselves and to express who they really are, and they're too busy in that people-pleasing mode, it's almost like you don't leave anything for somebody to be attracted to. And then, of course, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I abandon myself to please you, and then I get abandoned. And so you'll see that, and every attachment style has their variation of these things in different ways.
So does this somewhat explain why sometimes you have, you might say, maybe not secure, but maybe it might be like anxious or secure. Anyway, I don't know. I'm not a therapist, but there's like certain women that you're like, she's so kind and she's so sweet and she's so good. Why is she with that asshole? Is it potentially the trait variety that even though he's clunky about it, that aggression or that dismissiveness at least does represent like an assertiveness that maybe she lacks and longs for?
Okay, I love this discussion. So yes and no. So It absolutely can be. So it can be, like you said, assertiveness. It can be, how often do you hear like women are attracted to bad boys? Mm-hmm. Guess what brand of women that is? It's always women who feel like they have to be perfect. They have to make sure that they're, not doing anything wrong and coloring inside the lines. And so when somebody's fearlessly expressing themselves in whatever way and rebellious against societal norms, of course, that's so attractive from a trait variety perspective. So for sure, it can be context like that. There's two other things that really create attraction. Somebody meeting your deeply unmet needs, and it can be all sorts of things, but the biggest ones that I'll see people really fall into attraction with around those things are if somebody makes you feel seen and your whole childhood you never felt seen, or if somebody makes you feel protected and your whole childhood you grew up feeling like you were out of sorts and no one was there to protect you and you couldn't rely on anybody. You'll see these things in terms of needs. But what we will invest in the longest term, and this is where it gets a little bit complex for anybody who's new to this stuff, we have 6 stages of relationship: dating, honeymoon, power struggle, stability, commitment, bliss. In the dating and honeymoon stage, trait variety, somebody meeting your deeply unmet needs, are the biggest sources of attraction. It's how we draw people in and what people are really attracted to. In the power struggle stage and beyond, we invest in people who represent the subconscious comfort zone of how we treat ourselves. In other words, if you take an anxiously attached woman, just in your example, who's so sweet and nice and kind and good and maybe people-pleasing, chances are she's dismissing and avoiding her own feelings, needs, and boundaries because she's too busy prioritizing everybody else's. And thus, she's going to be very likely to invest in, over the long term, somebody who also dismisses and avoids her feelings, needs, and boundaries because it represents her subconscious comfort zone in how she has the relationship to herself. And our subconscious at the end of the day is choosing people and situations to invest in that mirror back to us what is the most familiar because it equates it to safety and survival. And ultimately, we're survival wired.
So is this why most relationships don't work out? Because in the first two stages, we're drawn to trait variety. And then in the third stage, trait variety becomes problematic because it's uncomfortable, because it's unfamiliar?
Totally. Have you ever seen people and they go like this? They start off and they're like, oh my gosh, because I would see when I was running client practice, I would see this all the time. Somebody would be like, I am so attracted to this person. He's so easygoing. Power struggle stage comes along and they go, he never makes plans. It drives me nuts. He never makes an effort. He's so lazy. Or, the early stages start out and we're like, oh, wow, this person, they're so assertive. I'm so attracted to their confidence, their assertiveness. Power struggle stage comes around and what do we have? They never make compromises. They never care for my feelings. They never take me into consideration. So the things that we start out attracted to when we hit the power struggle stage will often be the things that we resent the most. And the answer to it actually is trait integration work. It's taking on these aspects of somebody else in a healthy way to balance them out, to make a sense of wholeness within ourselves. So I'll give an example. I had my husband. I did a lot of work on myself before I met him. And we've been together for almost 10 years. But I thought I did all this work on myself. Well, he was very assertive and fantastic with his boundaries. And I was very attracted to that in the beginning stage. I thought it was kind of like amazing how with total strangers, he could just like say what he wanted without thinking twice. Anyways, time goes on and I start to resent that. We start living together. We're hitting the power struggle stage about 1.5 years into the relationship. And I realize, oh my goodness, like this is actually starting to drive me nuts. I need more compromise. I need more of these things in a relationship, but I knew this already. So I realized, okay, well, my work is to also be more assertive with him. And so I had to say, hey, I need more compromise. These are my needs. I need these things to be taken into consideration. And because I communicated those in a healthy way, he was able to come around and actually showed up incredibly well. And what happened is we both heal from that. I get to take back some of the things I was afraid to do in childhood, set boundaries, have boundaries that were safe and worthy of being expressed. And he gets to come into a space where he feels safe to let somebody rely on him, make compromises, be more vulnerable. And it was healing for both of us. And I think that's a big purpose of why we're attracted to these things, because in taking them on from each other, it creates a deeper sense of wholeness. But when we don't know that this is how it works, it usually ends up in a lot of frustration and, fights and arguments in the power struggle stage.
So, okay, this is revelatory. If you would, I apologize. I should have been writing this down. I am now. Do you mind telling me again the 6 stages of relationship? And I'm sure the audience won't mind hearing it again too.
Absolutely. So the first stage is the dating stage. It's basically the vetting stage of relationships. It generally lasts 0 to 6 months. And it's marked into the rite of passage going into the honeymoon stage by a commitment to something. So let's say we say, we're going to be in a relationship together. We're going to be exclusive. Okay, now we move into the honeymoon. The honeymoon stage generally lasts another year after that, sometimes up to 1.5 years. And then when we get really comfortable with somebody, we take the mask off more. Some people will be like, oh, I took the mask off early. But generally, we have our fears, our flaws, the big things that start to come out. And as we take the mask off, it triggers the power struggle stage. A lot of relationships live and die in the power struggle stage. Unfortunately, there's no really time marker. But the rite of passage to get out of it is acceptance and vulnerability, being able to be more vulnerable, share our fears, share our needs, work through those things, have discussions about them, and be able to take each other into consideration in a more accepting and loving way. And if we move out of the power struggle stage, we move from more conditionally based love. I only show myself with mask on and with conditions into more unconditionally based love. I am actually letting you deeply see me and my fears or wounds or flaws and vice versa. And there's a deep, more unconditional bonding that takes place. Once we get out of the power struggle, we move into the stability stage, marked by us finally knowing how to take each other into consideration on those really tough, vulnerable things, those insecurities, those fears. And then if we move out of that, we get into the commitment stage and then the bliss stage. The bliss stage is like the honeymoon stage, but with the mask off, with actually really knowing somebody in a more unconditional and deep way.
Ooh, I love that. Honeymoon, but with mask off.
Yes.
That's that's the goal.
Yes, exactly.
That's the goal, is that your primary relationship is, well, and I suppose that you could say my goal is to have this be true in all my relationships, that it's safe to be fully myself.
Exactly. so many people, they fight to stay in the honeymoon stage. They're like, no, I want to fight to stay in the honeymoon stage. And they avoid talking about problems and they try to keep the mask on and be perfect. And that will just increase the challenges you have in the power struggle, because how we actually work through and get to that bliss stage is to take the mask off, allow ourselves to be more seen, more known, more understood. And that deepens the connection and the roots of more unconditionally based love so that we can actually get to that bliss stage.
What were the 3 causes of attraction? You said it was trait variety. You said was possibly the second most powerful. What was the first and third?
The first in the early stage is somebody meeting your deeply unmet need.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
So if somebody felt unseen their whole childhood, somebody makes them feel really seen. It's actually a big place that people experience limerence from, like intense infatuation that can be quite disruptive to their lives, and cause them to do things that they may not normally do. And then somebody who represents the subconscious comfort zone for how you treat yourself is number 3.
Subconscious comfort zone for how you treat yourself. So, oh my gosh, this is such a great conversation to have. Now that my relationship is at a reasonably mature, I don't know where we are. I mean, bliss, it might be self-aggrandizing to say, well, we're in bliss, but like she's a good one and we've done a lot of work. I'll say that. But it's so fun now to look back and see the winding road through these stages. So when you talked about deeply unmet needs will trigger a person sometimes to do incredibly disruptive things to their own life. I told someone that when, I met my wife, went quickly into infatuation. I was living in New York at the time. She was living in St. George. And I think we'd known each other for 4 months when I had a consulting gig in New York that paid really well and I had an apartment and it was like, I had a whole life. And I told him, I'm out, I'm done. I packed up my apartment, loaded up a U-Haul, which the U-Haul was about the same size as the New York apartment. So that was convenient. And I just drove out to St. George and was like, babe, I'm coming. And she was like, wait, I don't know if I'm ready. And I said, look, I'm going to get there. I'm going to be at your front door and you can either let me in or you can be like, no, and I'll just go get an apartment and we'll try to make it work. But like, I'm committed. I don't think it's going to work long distance. And so I'm committed enough to trying that I'm literally going to upend my entire life and move across the country. And so now I'm trying to think, oh, well, she must have met some deeply unmet need of mine, right?
Totally. And that's a really beautiful example. And I will talk about what the need might be, or there might have been multiple, but unfortunately, sometimes they're not really beautiful examples where then here you are all these years later with a beautiful wife and family. A lot of times it's when people cheat. They cheat because spouse or partner is not meeting a deeply unmet need. Over time, somebody comes to resent it, and then somebody comes along externally that represents that need, and the subconscious mind is a needs meeting machine, and it will justify and rationalize how to go to that person for that need. So it's very interesting. Now, when you first met her, I bet I can guess exactly what the needs are. So you think she was a fearful avoidant, right? The anxious avoidant attachment style.
Yeah, I think probably. Actually, I think she might have gone to full. I think she might have naturally been a fearful avoidant who had gone to full dismissive avoidant because of 2 particularly terrible abandonments by the biological parents of her children.
Yeah, and so she was more shut down in a sense. Did she, when she was with you, was she very present?
Yeah, I think we were like intoxicated with each other.
Yeah. That's very like fearful avoidant anxious attachment style, early stages. And so I imagine she's really present. She made you feel like really seen, really deeply connected in an intimate way. Like, and I don't mean necessarily like sexual, but like emotionally intimate. Like, yeah.
Well, first of all, I just have to like interrupt and say, I feel a little bit selfish right now. It's like, you're on the show. Like you do this, like you're a therapist, like you're like, oh my gosh, this turned into a therapy session. Like, is this
No,
okay?
I actually love that you're sharing personal examples because to be honest, I'm on tons of podcasts and I think that listeners do better to hear real things. Like I always think the more there's stories and reality. And so I actually hope you don't mind that I'm asking you all these questions because I think it really showcases like think about it. Like you can hear all these concepts for hours, but you always remember the story, not the concept. And the story, if you also read the concept, helps you remember the entire thing together. So I actually think it's way better to do it this way, quite honestly.
We also know that facts tell and stories sell. So hopefully if we're doing storytelling here, it'll help you sell more books too.
There we go.
But yeah, okay. So then I'll tell you what I think the deeply unmet need was. So I grew up with a genetic condition called Waardenburg syndrome, which has like a mild craniofacial affectation. And so I basically grew up feeling ugly and like I used to get called like retarded and stuff growing up. And so, and she's beautiful. And I think, but it wasn't the physical beauty. It was like, she didn't see me that way. And the fact that she was as physically beautiful as she was, somebody that I would have generally characterized as like way out of my league.
Yeah.
But the fact that she was drawn to me meant that she was, I'm like getting emotional. She was actually seeing me. She wasn't just seeing my face.
And that's something that's like when we miss that. And to be honest, like that's probably something all the way back, sure, like from childhood experiences, but honestly, even back to when you shared about your mom and how she was so busy, she probably couldn't quite be present enough. There's probably such deep roots of not being seen and having that depth of connection in the way that you would have thought that we're wired for, that even went beyond that physical piece, although that can actually be a huge point of attraction as well for people, like the need to feel attractive because somebody that we're so attracted to is attracted to us. That definitely plays into that. But that depth of also beneath that being seen and being seen for who you were and sort of your spirit and your personality, like those things will absolutely create deep, deep attraction points.
Yeah, I think it was that pairing of being seen and not being seen as ugly, like the combo. Okay, so I feel like we've done a really, really good job of delaying the gratification to the audience since I'm sure everybody listening is like, oh my gosh, I totally see myself in one of these attachment styles. What do I do? What do I do? When is she going to tell me how to fix it? And we've gone 48 minutes without telling them. So in this last window that we have here, if that's a thing that you're comfortable revealing, I kind of feel like it's like the how does the magic trick work moment. But like, what do we do about it if we're kind of burdened with one of these insecure attachment styles?
Hey there, it's Jeff. So real quick, I want to let you know about my text message community. I use text messages to provide unique value to the Unlock Your Potential community. These texts could just be random thoughts. It could be letting you be the first to know about an event I'm planning, maybe giving an update on a special I'm running or some free training that I host for my community. Anyway, just shoot me a text to get subscribed to the list. The number is 702-996-3926. Again, that is 702-996-3926. Let's get back to the podcast.
Okay, so there are 5 major pillars of becoming securely attached.
Okay.
Well, I'll give a tool for a few of them, but I'm just going to give them an overarching theme first. One is reprogramming our core wounds. So the fear of abandonment, the fear of being betrayed, the fear of being trapped. These are old pieces of baggage. Those are relationship ideas we got conditioned with, and then we project onto the future. We can reprogram them, and it's not even hard to do. It's just that nobody really talks about it enough. Number 2, we learn our needs and how to meet them ourselves. It's really the difference between it's what self-soothing is. A lot of dismissive avoidants, they seem like they're good self-soothers, but they're just self-numbers. And a lot of anxious attachment styles, they always try to soothe through other people, right? So it's like you always go into the gas tank with your tank empty. And it's like every time you're, oh my God, is the gas station going to be open? It's a panic, right? And so much of healing that side of things is learning, well, I can meet my needs and fill the bucket halfway. So if I pull into a gas station and it's closed, that's fine. I can go to the next gas station. We're not coming from this place of lack and emptiness. So part 2, identify your needs and meet them yourself. Part 3, communicate them to others. Needs are the lifeblood of relationships. There's so much work. There's Dr. Gary Chapman's work, and he's like the 5 love languages, and that's amazing stuff. But there's nothing that will run as deep as needs in terms of giving and receiving love. Like I have a big quality time love language. There's going to be a big difference between if I sit down and watch Netflix with somebody versus I sit down and have a deep emotional conversation because I have a big need for emotional connection. So like the needs will actually supersede love languages in a very big way. So communicating our needs to others is point number 3 so that we can actually get our needs met and actually feel more loved in a really big way. And that's a 2-way street, right? Hearing what our partner's needs are and being able to meet those, really, really powerful. Number 4, emotional regulation. little bit of nervous system work. It's something we can do on a daily basis if we're used to feeling like we're in fight or flight. And number 5, having healthy boundaries. I think a lot of people think that boundaries are separation. Boundaries are joining, and they're absolutely necessary to move through the power struggle stage of relationships, because if I don't share my true yeses and nos with somebody, they don't know who I really am. And I've got the mask on and I'm not going to make it out of the power struggle stage. So boundaries are an authentic sharing of ourselves, our true yeses, our true nos, and they allow us to be joined with in a healthy and powerful way where somebody really knows who we are. So we can go through, and I can actually give some tools to break down those 5 major areas. But if we can hit those things strongly in a way that specifically engages the subconscious mind in the process, then we can actually recondition our attachment style as a whole. And this is something that we've actually done through our programs with over 35,000 people. And we have an 88.7% success rate and a 97.7% NPS score, like satisfaction score. And these are self-paced programs a lot of the time. Like, these are things people are doing on themselves. So these tools, like when we engage the subconscious mind, they really work. I think a lot of people are like, it's too hard to change your attachment style. It's actually not hard. It's usually a 90-day period. It's just that we need to engage the subconscious mind in the process.
So first thing that came to mind as you were sharing that was around communicating our needs, really learning our needs and communicating them. Are you a fan or a student of the nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg's work?
Yeah, love it.
Okay, so you know where I'm going with that then. I mean, it's all around, developing a vocabulary around needs and feelings. So I literally am, just this morning, I finished re-listening to Nonviolent Communication, the book. And I've actually been practicing that. I'm like practicing having more specific I-centric vocabulary that's not, projecting or judgmental around articulating my needs. So for what that's worth, if people aren't familiar with NVC, it's essentially the language of needs and the associated feelings, and then how to make specific requests without ever making anybody in your life wrong for not already knowing what you need, basically.
Exactly. So can I share a couple tools here for these pieces?
Yeah, please.
I'd love to, if I can, go through the different needs I tend to see the most by attachment style, so people can walk away with like knowing what their needs are or probably are. And then some specific pointers for communication so that we can share those things with other people, because it will help us feel loved and seen and connected. So anxious attachment styles, their big needs in relationships tend to be certainty. Okay, so somebody cancels a date and then doesn't reschedule, it'll drive them, or they're waiting for a text back. Like, that absence of certainty will often eat them up inside. Certainty, consistency, validation, reassurance, encouragement, to be made to feel important, seen, and intimately connected. And these are big anxious attachment style needs. Now, the funny thing is that people often project from their perception, right? So anxious people are often giving their avoidant partners what they would need rather than what that person needs, or vice versa. We see this across all different attachment pairings. Dismissive avoidance, their big needs in relationships, of course, the obvious: freedom, independence, autonomy. But actually, interpersonally, they really need appreciation and acknowledgement. They need to feel respected. And the big things that they will fall into limerence with, we talked about those big points of attraction, the big things that will really get dismissive avoidance into intense infatuation, but it's because they actually need these things in their relationships. Empathy, acceptance is arguably the biggest one, and support. And so when they have those things in relationships, they tend to feel extremely fulfilled. Fearful avoidance, their big needs in relationships, they share in both the anxious and avoidant side in many ways. So they tend to have this fear, for sure, of deep intimacy and connection. They don't like surface things. They really want a lot of depth. They also really need, separate from either anxious or avoidant, they need a lot of novelty, exploration, and discovery. Those are big needs. For them, growth in relationships, they really want to see that the relationship's evolving, growing, and they also need the freedom, independence, and autonomy, just like the dismissive avoidant. So once somebody knows their needs, or sorry, you're going to ask a question.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, so it makes sense that they would want growth because it essentially keeps them from feeling stuck, because the relationship produces its own novelty in a sense.
Yes, exactly. And fearful avoidants do not like feeling stuck, trapped, helpless, powerless. Oof, not good things for a fearful avoidant to feel. So it actually feeds into the antidote for that at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. You were going to say something else, I think.
Yeah. So what we can do is once we understand these needs, we can start communicating them. And I sort of built on something from nonviolent communication originally, because I have a little bit of background in it as well. But I give people like 3 main pointers, sometimes a 4th, about when we communicate these needs. So the first, I call them like our stops on the train. The first stop on the train, very simply, is positive framing. Nobody does well with, you never do this, you didn't do that. Nobody hears you. We go into defense mode. So when you're going to frame a need that you have, rather than saying something like, hey, you never spend enough time with me, you don't care, say, hey, I feel disconnected this week. I would love for us to plan something fun to do on the weekend. Let's think of a fun date that we can, take part in. So if we positively frame, we say what we would like to have happen rather than what we're seeing is not happening. That's pointer number 1 for communication. Number 2 is, and I can't even tell you how many people get this part wrong. Okay. It's like our human nature. We have to paint a picture of what it looks like. I would see endlessly in my first year of client practice, people would be like, I want more support from my partner. They would leave, come back the next week. My partner didn't support me at all this week. And the partner would go, what do you mean? I took out the trash every day. And they would be like, I didn't need the trash taken out. I needed you to be more encouraging and validating. So we have to paint a picture for what the need looks like to us. Otherwise, we're going to have some challenges. Okay, so that's part.
So what it looks like once the need is met.
Exactly. So really giving like examples, like if you need validation, that doesn't mean, some people think like a hug is validation. No, validation might be, I need you to point out something you appreciate about me or that I did today or that you're seeing my hard work, for example.
Okay.
So that's point number 2. Number 3, we have to see our needs through. True embodiment of proper communication is not that one day 4 years ago, you told your partner of something you needed, and then they forgot about it and you never said it again. True embodied communication means that the moment I need something, I'm actually going to go to my partner and say, hey, I need this thing, or hey, just a reminder, and actually see the need through. And what that does is it fosters healthy and the normalization of communication, just like saying, hey, can you pass me the glass of water? Like, we want our communication of our needs to feel that streamlined and that simple and easy, where it doesn't have to feel scary and vulnerable. We can talk about needs that openly. So if we can start with just those 3 things and really do them well, it takes our communication a very long way.
My gosh, this has been just a masterclass. Thank you. I've got so many notes. I'm like excited to go home and go over this with Jacqueline and try to come up with some needs that we need to talk through. I
love that.
So, okay, you talked about the 5 pillars of becoming securely attached, and that's something that somebody can self-guide over maybe a 90-day period. You mentioned, do you have like a program or a directive for that?
Yeah, so we do a 90-day attachment healing boot camp. So the goal is that within 90 days, you're dominantly securely attached, and it really covers those 5 main pillars. So knowing your needs, meeting them yourself, communicating them, regulating your nervous system, really simple work, and then reprogramming core wounds, which is a big part of like leaving those old relationship fears we have of abandonment or betrayal or being trapped in the past where they belong, because we were not born with those things. They get conditioned into us through repetition and emotion, and we can actually rewire those things so we leave them at the door and they stop coming back.
So actually, one thing that you've said a couple times, and I want to make sure I punctuate, is that our personality, well, and tell me if I'm saying this right, like our personality or our trait set maybe is essentially programmed by repetition of emotion.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's not just the things that happen to us, but it's the feelings we have about the things that happen to us on a recurring basis.
Exactly. Now, how we get imprinted or how we obtain programs is through, like, let's say, for example, a child grows up in a home and constantly the parents are critical. Maybe the parents have good intentions. They're trying to prepare the child to survive in the real world, but the repetition and emotion of that experience will fire and wire those neural pathways. And that's how programming happens. However, emotion can outweigh repetition if it's strong enough. So you could have somebody, for example, who doesn't have an I am unsafe core wound, but that tomorrow they're in an earthquake and the building falls and they barely make it out alive. And, from that point forward, they constantly fear that something bad could happen. So if something is emotional enough and intense enough, it can actually create an immediate imprint on the subconscious mind. But that's very far and few between. Those are big T traumas. And they're hard to reprogram on the positive side. It's hard to get a positive enough emotional imprint to immediately outweigh a negative one, although it's possible. So really we focus on repetition and emotion for about 21 days. And that's part of how we create those new neural pathways.
So even call it a PTSD, like a war trauma, you're saying you're not going to be able to acutely correct it, even though it was acutely created, because the acute creation event was so massive. There's no equivalent on the positive side, literally.
There is by technicality. It's just extremely rare to be able to get somebody into that emotional state by intention. So, for example, somebody could spend their whole life feeling unloved, and they are still doubting that their partner really loves them. But then at the altar, their partner's there, and they give the most loving vows, and they finally realize in this acute positive moment, wait, I actually am loved. This person does really love me. And yes, that could create this positive imprinting on the other side, but it would be more difficult to say, hey, let's sit down and right in this very moment, I want you to think about all the times that you felt connected enough to create this huge positive connection imprint that outweighs that original many years of fearing abandonment, for example. So instead, what we do is there's a tool called autosuggestion, and we can actually come up with 10 pieces of evidence to oppose our core wound, record it back, and listen to it in a suggestible state, meaning after meditation, first thing when you wake up or last thing before you go to bed, because your brain's producing more alpha brain waves. And you can listen to it for 21 days, and across 21 days, you'll nail out that imprint.
So is this, and this would be probably a whole other podcast-worthy tangent, but does sort of what you just described explain why psychedelics can be useful in treating PTSD because they intensify positive emotion?
Yes, 100% nailed it. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Oh my gosh. I wish we had 5 more episodes planned. This is the stuff I would talk about for fun. I feel like I just did. Okay. Hey, so where can the world go to get more Thais Gibson?
So I have at personaldevelopmentschool.com, even for personaldevelopmentschool.com/free trial. We actually run quite frequently just open free trials. If anybody wants to poke in the programs, check them out. You can go in for 14 days and just see if you think it's interesting. And download little course workbooks, stuff like that. And then I'm on YouTube. I post daily on YouTube at Personal Development School Thais Gibson. And then on Instagram at Personal Development _school. And also people can take an attachment style quiz on our website. So if you want to find out what your attachment style is at personaldevelopmentschool.com, it gives a report, goes into a lot of detail about your wounds, your needs, all that kind of stuff. Is that roadmap to kick off.
And the 90-day program for reprogramming your attachment style, that's obviously available through the Personal Development School website.
Exactly. And people can go in there for the free trial too. And you'll get that little roadmap for the little course materials to dive into and all the reprogramming tools and all that kind of stuff.
My goodness. Amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been incredible. I'm so grateful you came on the show.
Thank you so much. This is one of my favorite podcast episodes that I did. This was so fun to just hear, you share more real things and we can talk about it and dig into stuff. So amazing hosting job. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I'm honored. And of course, even when Thais Gibson's on the show, audience, I'll still say you're the best part of the show and why we do it. And I'm so grateful we got this time together. I'll see you next time.
If you loved that episode, then you're definitely going to love this one. Check it out.
Without a shared purpose, without a shared vision, all unions will fray. We're in many ways very difficult to be in relationship with over the long term because we have a really acute survival instinct.